Hello friends, I have a bit of an update for the Mara finisher guide that I had previously put out. It was mentioned that some areas needed a little bit more clarity, and honestly some sections I just completely forgot to include, one of those being like a proper opener. So in today's video, I just wanted to expand on a few of these areas. The first thing I want to cover are the weapon trees and what you should be keeping an eye out for on Mara. Again, the best weapon that you can get for the finisher build is either going to be Fated Strike or the Fateful Dagger specifically, or you can use Cyril's Reckoning, which has a very strong AoE burst effect that also gives you a bunch of critical strike. This is also very good for the finisher build. Personally, I really like the Fateful Dagger just because it gives you extra cooldown reduction, and that extra cooldown reduction means you get more Widow's Bites and also more Brooding Shadow charges. This is especially true until you get the legendary boots. So this, like, the cooldown reduction really helps fit more Widow's Bites in to kind of fix your energy problems that you'll likely run into playing this build until you get the legendary boots. So once you get the legendary boots, I could definitely see a case for Cyril's Reckoning, but before then, I prefer Fateful Dagger. This is really up to you guys and how you kind of manage your energy, but this is my preference. And then as far as the best weapon tree goes, you want to go for Visions of Grandeur for your master trait. This is very strong. It's good on every single weapon, and this is going to be the main thing that you're looking for when you first acquire a weapon. The other one that's pretty good is also Brave Machinations. And then a third option that you can choose is, I believe it's on this one here. Nope, not that one. The other one you can consider is Martial Initiative. This is also pretty decent, so keep an eye out for those three. And then Amethyst Splinters is decent, so that could be a little bit of a temporary trait that you can use until you find a weapon with a couple better traits. One thing that I would not suggest doing is re-rolling. You can re-roll these traits at the blacksmith, or not the blacksmith, this vendor here. You can go to weapon tuning, and in this section they have heroic, like, you can re-roll the traits on your weapons, and I would not suggest doing that. It's very expensive. It's 750 gold just to re-roll the master traits, and then it's 400 gold to re-roll heroic traits. So I personally would just recommend instead just using a weapon temporarily, and if you find something that's passable, just continue to use that. That's kind of what I'm doing with my Fateful Dagger. This is good enough until I get something better in Paragon or eventually in Eternal. So this is just the weapon that I've continued with for the time being. As far as heroic traits, I would suggest using Seized Opportunity, Inspired Allegiance, and then also Kindling is very strong, so you can consider that. But also Vengeful Soul can be another option that you use there. The best defensive trait you want is going to be the Treasure Hunter's Delight. This gives you a big damage reduction anytime you use one of your relics. So, like, for example, if I were to cleanse the entire party, even if the party didn't need a cleanse, this will also give me a really strong damage reduction effect. And this is extremely powerful, especially in later progression. So if your weapon has this defensive trait, that's gonna be the one that you absolutely want to take, assuming it's along the path to your master trait. And then just briefly, I want to also talk about the different set bonuses. Mara's and basically every DPS, you want to be using the Drakheim set that you get from Ransack of Drakheim. This is a very powerful effect. It gives you a ton of primary stat when you use your Spirit ultimate, and this is just absurdly powerful for the finisher build in particular, and there's nothing that really comes close to it. you can randomly roll into it. Like you see here, like I have the Drakheim, a blue chest for the Drakheim pieces and also a purple one. I randomly rolled into it by using the vendor here and just re-rolling these different item slots. Like you can take like a purple gloves and you can use the mithril to re-roll into some of the Drakheim pieces. So something to be aware of, if you see Drakheim's Absolution as one of the tier set or as one of the resulting options in your re-rolls, definitely consider taking it. It's very strong. The other tier set that's also very powerful is one that's also kind of difficult to acquire, but it is the Sithral Fall or Sithril's Fall set bonus, which is this effect here, the Draconic Might, where it gives you a primary stat boost whenever you critical strike. That's another, like probably the second best option that you can get after Drakheim's Absolution. And then next up, covering some of the gem options and some of those changes. Let me hide my camera here. The changes that were made recently in one of the balancing patches from last week is that Amethyst got a pretty sizable buff. They went from giving, I think, 8% critical strike at the level 1 gem state to going up to 10%. This gives you a bunch of crit strike when you're hitting something with more than 50% health, so that's very strong. But the main change is once you get that to level 6, it goes to giving you 30% critical strike, which is just totally nuts, especially with how Grievous Wounds works in this game. So if you don't already know, Grievous Wounds is a mechanic across all characters where if you reach 100% critical strike chance for some reason, any extra critical strike chance that you have in excess to that amount will be added as a damage modifier for the damage on that ability. So, you know what gives us 100% critical strike chance? That would be Deadly Scheme. So anytime you use one of your finishers on a target that is, or anytime you use a Deadly Scheme proc on a target that has more than 50% health, that excess critical strike chance from these gems is going to be added into the damage of that critical strike, making this very strong, very good. You definitely want to try to get to 6 of this. The second best option seems to be tier 6 of the red or the rubies. This gives you a bunch of primary stat while your health is above 80%. So a lot of the times you should be hovering around this range anyhow, assuming your healer is able to keep up. So that's another pretty strong, consistent damage increase that you can get. And then the third option is probably not really something you can easily get, and this is more for organized play. But if you can get to tier 6 in the blues, this is a very strong burst effect where during your ultimate, it's just another Drakheim's Absolution tier set where it gives you another primary stat injection. So you would be doing some pretty insane burst during your ultimate and you would just like melt bosses. This is again kind of an organized play exclusively just because you're going to be more consistently pulling around your ultimate timings and stuff like that. So that's a really good option to call out. And then after that, you just have the emeralds, which again are just giving you an expertise damage buff anytime you damage something new for the first time. Alrighty, so now we're going to move into some of the DPS rotation changes. Not really much is changing. I just needed to add a little bit more context on the prepping stage or the prepping phase. In the last video, I touched on the burst phase, how that kind of looks, what the conditions are that need to be met before you can burst, and also what the actual damage sequence is. And it's pretty straightforward. I will link a timestamp to that in the previous video if you just want to go back and see what that looks like. But what I needed to do is a couple things. So I need to go over the opener rotation. I need to add a little bit more information into the prepping phase because, as was previously mentioned and called out, there's more nuance to that stage than I kind of gave credit for. I made it seem overly simplified. I realize it is not. There are still a lot of things in the prepping phase that I get incorrect and I mess up during my rotation. So I want to try to call some of those things out. And then secondly, I also want to go a little bit more in depth on what the AoE rotation looks like and a couple more of those details. Okay, so the first thing that I want to look at today is adding a little bit more details into the prepping phase and kind of what some of the nuances of this rotation might look like. So in the previous video, I mentioned that you basically are just trying to dump your bad cooldown or your bad Malevolence buff. In this case, in single target, the bad buff is Arachnid Assault. I made the implication that you want to dump that buff as quickly as possible. And in some cases, that is true, but not always. If you're trying to build up for like your ultimate or something, and you have like a certain build, like a burst window that you're trying to accomplish, yeah, you can dump your Arachnid Assaults as quickly as possible with just 2 combo points. But doing the 2 combo point Arachnid Assault dump is more energy intensive and might cause you to run out of energy quicker. So the change that I just wanted to kind of address is, or introduce rather, is a state of equilibrium. So what I mean by this is when you are in your single target rotation and you just finish a burst phase, you're gonna have a situation like this where you just finish your burst, you have Deadly Scheme building and 2 stacks of Arachnid Assault. Before Deadly Scheme procs, you want to make sure that you dump 1 Arachnid Assault, and then you have a state of equilibrium here where you have one Queen's Fang and 1 Arachnid Assault, and you have Deadly Scheme active. Don't burst here, instead use Queen's Fang. This resets the timer, so you now have time again to rebuild for your next burst phase like this. So now I bought myself time so that I can again just correctly enter my burst phase more comfortably, and I can just go through that whole burst window. And now once more, we're in this state where Deadly Scheme is about to proc too soon. I enter a state of equilibrium and I dump with Queen's Fang on the correct finisher without using Assassin's Guile or Brooding Shadows. So by staying in this state of equilibrium, it more easily guarantees that you use the correct finisher, but it also buys time like that to get into the correct burst window, and it kind of more easily guarantees that you're going to use your Deadly Scheme on the right finisher. You still have the same conditions for your burst window, which is you need to have a stack of Brooding Shadows ready to go. You need to have 2 stacks of the correct Malevolence buff. So in single target, this is Queen's Fang. In AoE, this is Arachnid Assault. And then you need to have Deadly Scheme procced or close to proccing. So until all 3 of those conditions are met, you want to try to stay in this state of equilibrium. And that's, once more, only during your prepping phase. In AoE, this changes slightly in that once you get enough talent points and you get Feed the Queen, you can then more consistently just rotate constantly in this state of equilibrium where you're always hovering between 1 stack or 1 or 2 stacks of Arachnid Assault Malevolence buff, or 1 stack of Arachnid Assault and 1 stack of Queen's Fang. So you just constantly want to stay in that state of equilibrium because, again, Feed the Queen is going to buff your Queen's Fang damage based off of targets hit by your Skittering Blade. So Malevolence buff plus Feed the Queen is going to give this build some really insane funnel damage. And it's not that bad to use the Malevolence and Deadly Scheme buffs on Queen's Fang, especially if it's going into a target that needs to more quick, needs to die more quickly. So this rotation, very simple to consider. It doesn't really matter where your Arachnid Assault or where your Deadly Scheme goes. It can go into either Arachnid Assault or your Queen's Fang. Just depends on the pack that you're pulling. There are some target count nuances. So if you're in 5 targets, you want to try to make sure that your Deadly Scheme is going into Arachnid Assault. Anything below 3 or anything below 5 targets, so like in this case with the training dummies, there are 4. The math kind of goes to show that getting the Deadly Scheme proc on your Feed the Queen plus Malevolence buffed Queen's Fang is going to be more damage overall. So using that kind of system of targeting, the rotation that you would try to do here is you want to build up to your 2 stacks of Arachnid Assault, and now we're just kind of hovering in this state of equilibrium. And so now I have some stacks of Feed the Queen, and I have my Malevolence buff, so we're just going to use that, and it does 53k, so pretty strong. And that's kind of the entire rotation. You're just constantly trying to flow between those states and try to maintain equilibrium in AoE situations. I realize that I'm just constantly running out of energy right now. I'm not really trying to fight for that. I'm just trying to show the simple state of buffs that you're trying to maintain. So just to recap, the state that you're trying to hover in is 1 to 2 stacks of Arachnid Assault, and depending on the target count, you want to use your Deadly Scheme proc on Arachnid Assault in 5 or more targets. And if you have Feed the Queen, you want to use your Deadly Scheme proc on a Malevolence buffed, Feed the Queen buffed Queen's Fang in 4 or fewer targets. Actually, one correction there is you don't really care about Feed the Queen in 1 to 2 targets. You can still use Skittering Blades in 3 targets. And if there is a 2 target situation, you just do your single target rotation in that scenario. I'm going to show an opener now in single target where I'm only using Maiden. Again, this is going to assume that you have little to no stacks of Deadly Scheme, and also you're coming into this fight without any stacks of Malevolence. If you do have Malevolence Queen's Fang ready to go, you can kind of cut out these early phases of prepping by using Arachnid Assault and just jump straight into your burst phase. So the first thing you want to do, assuming no stacks of Malevolence, no stacks of Deadly Scheme, is you're going to open with your Widow's Bite to apply Seething Poison, build up, use Hemorrhaging Strike, and now we're going to dump some Arachnid Assaults to build up our Queen's Fang. And now we're ready for our burst. So we're going to pop Maiden, Weapon, Stealth, Backstab, Queen's Fang, Widow's Bite, Queen's Fang, Backstab, Arachnid Assault, Backstab, Arachnid Assault, Stealth, Backstab, Queen's Fang, Widow's Bite, Queen's Fang. And that's the whole opener rotation right there. Now for an ultimate opener, it's basically the exact same thing, except it's kind of extended because of Final Stratagem. What I've been doing in the ultimate plus Final Stratagem opener is using Final Stratagem at a very specific point to refresh combo points and energy in Maiden window. So I'll try to showcase that here, but it's going to look pretty much identical. So once again, assuming no stacks of Malevolence, very few stacks of Deadly Scheme, we're still going to open with Widow's Bite to apply Seething Poison, build up, use Hemorrhaging Strike, and dump Arachnid Assaults. And we are ready to go now. So we're going to Stealth. Now we're going to use Ultimate and Backstab, Queen's Fang, Backstab, Arachnid Assault, Final Stratagem, Arachnid Assault. That Spirit proc was untimely. Maiden, and then we're kind of going back into our single target rotation. I realized I just missed a Deadly Scheme proc there because I was trying to multitask, but this is basically the whole rotation here. That's what it would look like, except I assume you would be monitoring your Deadly Scheme proc a little bit more closely. it's easier to do than what I just showcased. I'm just trying to multitask, so hopefully that did help illustrate what that opener looks like. The reason why I'm using Final Stratagem on that last Arachnid Assault is because Maiden is just about to expire, and using the Stratagem at that point still gives you instant combo points. It also refills your energy, and then once you dump that Arachnid Assault, you can just use Maiden once again and go right back into your stealth. It flows very nicely, I've found, so that's been my preferred opener. Let me know down in the comments if any of you Mara pros have found something a little bit better, so that we can all educate each other. I think because the finisher rotation opener is so long, I'll just have it written out in the description below. I think it'll be easier for some people to just kind of read and process, maybe instead of just seeing it visually while I'm trying to walk through it. All right, so next up, we're going to be talking about the AoE opening rotation. This is pretty much the same as the single target rotation, except you just replace Backstab with Skittering Blade, and the buff that you want to be prioritizing is Arachnid Assault instead of Queen's Fang. One important thing to note here is that because I'm using Feed the Queen, I'm going to be constantly alternating in this state of equilibrium between having 2 stacks of Arachnid Assault Malevolence buff, or having 1 stack of Malevolence Arachnid Assault and Malevolence Queen's Fang. This is because, especially in this target count, actually using the Malevolence Queen's Fang is better when you're using Feed the Queen, but I'm going to assume that I don't have just a 4 target count scenario, because that's not extremely common in an opening situation throughout a dungeon. So I'm going to assume that this is more than what it actually is. So first thing, we're going to open with Widow's Bite from stealth, and then we're going to use 2 Queen's Fangs. So this gives us 2 Arachnid Assaults, and we're basically ready for our burst. We're going to use Maiden plus a weapon, stealth, skittering, and then Arachnid Assault, skittering, Arachnid Assault, skittering, Queen's Fang, skittering, Queen's Fang, stealth again, and then Arachnid Assault, Widow's Bite, and we're kind of just in our single target rotation. Again, I'm kind of maintaining a state of equilibrium here. And then now I have the situation there where I had a chance to trigger a Feed the Queen plus Malevolence buffed Queen's Fang in this target count, which is very strong. So the opener is simple. It's just basically skittering, Arachnid Assault, and you're kind of just dancing between the 2 states. It's very simple. The number 1 killer of DPS when you're playing the finisher build is running out of energy. If you're running out of energy, you're likely using your Widow's Bites at maybe an inopportune time. And I know that in my video, I had mentioned that you always want to be using a Widow's Bite during the burst phases, but sometimes you need to skip using a Widow's Bite in the burst phase, or just skip a burst phase entirely in order to kind of fix your energy. So what you see here is I'm just spamming my buttons in a state of being in low energy, and this is to simulate us leaving a burst window. So like right now, what I wouldn't want to do is just kind of sit here and do nothing. So instead, what I'm going to look to do is cheat in a Widow's Bite in order to kind of stay in the state of equilibrium, where I'm going to use Widow's Bite plus Arachnid Assault. And now that fixes our energy a little bit, and I can slowly build into Deadly Scheme Queen's Fang. And that helps fix our energy a little bit, helps buy some time for our Widow's Bite to come off cooldown. And I don't know if you saw that, but like I actually went from being little to no energy to suddenly getting like a big burst of energy, where I had some Venomous Delight procs happen in the middle there. And so that helped kind of fix some of my energy problems. And really, when you're staying in this state of equilibrium, it's actually giving you a moment to let some procs happen to fix your energy state. And Yeah, it kind of helps keep your energy reserves a little bit higher, so that way you can, better manage your energy sources and be ready for different burst windows and keep your DPS higher. All right, guys, I think that's going to be it for this little video update on the finisher build. Hopefully some of these tips help clear up several of the questions I've been getting regarding things like weapon traits and some rotation changes or tweaks. If there's any other questions or anything I can clear up, let me know down in the comments below. But as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.